Well, as our reading pointed out, humor is good for us. Studies have shown that it lowers blood pressure, lightens depression, reduces anxiety, it improves student performance, it helps people cope with stress, adversity, and grief. The Veterans Administration encourages clinicians to mention the importance of humor and laughter to their patients as an aid in helping to heal from physical and psychological ailments. But humor and creativity can also help bring about a more just and peaceful world. For example, in her study of the overthrow of Serbian dictator Slobodan Milosevic in the year 2000, social scientist Janjira Sambat-Punsiri argues that pranks and street comedy played a crucial role in the success of that nonviolent movement. Using humor undermines the authority of the power of authoritarians because they notoriously do not like to be laughed at. We have no experience with that whatsoever. In addition, such tactical frivolity, as it is called, can lighten the mood of a demonstration, shifting it from anger and fear to more of a street festival vibe, thus reducing the chances of it turning violent. Finally, humor diminishes the power of attacks on the resistors. When the Milosevic government condemned the opposition as terrorist, it was laughable, because people had come to see the opposition groups as mainly goofy kids who were performing street comedy and hardly these scary terrorists. And so the government looked ridiculous. And if the government does respond with violence, it looks really bad. Think of the image of ICE officers spraying chemical weapons at people wearing inflatable frog costumes in Portland earlier this year. So today, I'd like to look at some examples of how humor and the creativity that goes with it have helped people move toward greater social justice. And I want to begin with Women's Strike for Peace, a group that in December of 1962 presented what I consider to be a master class in disarming a bully using humor, irony, and common sense. So Women's Strike for Peace was comprised mainly of white, middle-class, married women with children who became very concerned when scientists discovered radioactive isotopes in breast milk, baby teeth, and cow's milk. The isotopes resulted from the government testing of nuclear weapons. In November of 1961, over 50,000 women in 60 cities across the US launched a one-day general strike from housework to protest the nuclear arms race. In small towns and big cities from California to New York, women walked out of their homes to march in the streets and demand that the government take immediate action to end the arms race, not the human race. It was the largest women's protest in the 20th century, and it seemingly came out of nowhere. Their actions caught the attention of the House Committee on Un-American Activities, or HUAC, and since 1938, in case you don't know, HUAC had been concerned with ferreting out subversives whom they claimed were posing major security threats to our national security. Wielding enormous power to ruin lives and careers, HUAC had terrified many who were brought before it, especially during the Red Scare of the 1940s and the 1950s. But when HUAC subpoenaed 15 members of Women's Strike for Peace, the women chose not to be intimidated. Instead, they played by their own rules, unfettered by the expectations, traditions, and constraints of a congressional committee. For example, In response to the subpoena, over 100 women wrote to the secretary of the committee offering to testify. The women were making the point that they had nothing to hide. When other groups and individuals whom HUAC targeted had sometimes refused to testify and sometimes caved in and named names of communists, these women volunteered to talk to the committee. HUAC refused these offers, sticking with the original 15. But in December of 1962, hundreds of women, many with babies and children in tow, converged on Washington, D.C. They filled the hearing rooms, and there was standing room only and a little bit of chaos as women were bouncing babies on their laps and toddlers were crawling in the aisles and playing on the floor. This, of course, upset the members of the committee, who deplored the women's complete ignorance of the gravitas of the situation. When the first witness was called, all the women stood. Unhappy with his show of solidarity, the committee chair banned standing. When the second witness was called, the women all clapped. The chair then banned standing. You can see where this is going. After this, when each woman was called, other women ran up to give her a supportive hug and a kiss before she testified. Obviously, the chair's ability to control the hearing was diminishing rapidly. And by the third day of hearings, the committee chair was a beaten man. The women gave standing ovations with impunity. They cheered and laughed when the witnesses said something funny, and they presented each witness with a bouquet of flowers as if she were the keynote speaker at a ladies' club luncheon. Despite the congressman's claim that the women's actions were naive, frivolous, and disrespectful, the women knew exactly what they were doing and why, and their goal was twofold. First, to impress upon Congress the link between nuclear testing and the health of their children, who, remember, were all there in front of the congressman to see. And second, to highlight the absurdity of the idea that mothers protecting their children were somehow more of a threat to national security than nuclear weapons. And in the court of public opinion, the women won hands down. The Chicago Daily News declared, "It's Ladies' Day at the Capitol. Hoots, howls, and charm. Congressmen meet their match." A cartoon in the Washington Post showed three aging and baffled committee members. One is seated at a hearing table, a second is holding a gavel, and a third leans into him and says, "I came in late. Which was it that was un-American? Women or peace?" HUAC never quite recovered from the shellacking they got those 3 days in December 1962. It's important to remember, though, that this didn't just happen. During the 3 weeks between receiving the subpoena and testifying, the women worked tirelessly, consulting lawyers, strategizing, clarifying their message, arranging logistics like housing and childcare, and getting the news out to their supporters so that all of these women and children could show up in Washington and show up the congressman. They intentionally embraced their identity as white, traditional, middle-class mothers whose job was to protect their children. They dressed conservatively. They spoke politely, if firmly, and this was all carefully planned. The power behind their action was its unexpectedness, which disarmed the committee. When one of the committee members asked Dagmar Wilson if Women Strike for Peace would commit to identifying and throwing out any members who were communist, she replied, "Absolutely not. In fact, if every person in this whole wide world doesn't get behind the nuclear disarmament movement, well, then God help us. It was not the response he expected. And in that response, she called into question the entire reason for HUAC's existence. Code Pink is a women's grassroots organization that was founded in 2002 to oppose the impending US invasion of Iraq. One of their first major actions was to construct a giant pink bed to roll down the street in Washington, D.C., telling political leaders to wake up and end war. In 2008, they created the Code Pink Armada out of canoes and rafts and staged a mock naval blockade of Congressman Gary Ackerman's houseboat on the Potomac River after he had introduced a resolution to block ports in Iran. Interestingly, he called it the most creative protest he had ever seen and engaged the group in a lively half-hour discussion that ended with him promising to do whatever he could to prevent war with Iran. I think we need something like that right now. They've also staged mock firings of government officials by presenting them with pink slips. Not pink slips of paper that say you're fired, but the slips that one wears under a dress. Pink lingerie. As Gail Brandeis wrote, Code Pink has never been about fists in the air. We want to smash paradigms without smashing windows. Making a difference doesn't have to be a chore. We've proven again and again it can be fun and energizing to change the world. Another example of humor and creativity at work is the red melt ice caps that people around the world wore this past winter during Operation Metro Surge when the Trump administration sent ICE agents to harass the citizens of Minneapolis. The inspiration came from the Norwegians, who showed their resistance to the Nazis during World War II by wearing red hats. The power of the caps lay in two things. They were both very ordinary and ubiquitous, and that meant everybody could wear them. It was, after all, winter in Norway, but it sent a message to others that they were not alone. It was a way to announce to the world that you were resisting the Nazis without actually saying it. And so it was, in a way, safe. I mean, how could you be arrested for wearing a hat during the winter in Norway? And I think it's easy to look at that and say, well, you know, that's fine, and it makes people feel good, but you know, what real difference does it make? But here's the thing. Seeing people wear these caps gave encouragement to others, and thereby increased the number of resistors and the number of resistors and the strength of the resistance. And the evidence that that made a difference is that in December of 1942, the Nazis outlawed red hats in Norway. Now, think about that for a minute. The Nazis were in the midst of fighting a global war on multiple fronts. Why would they waste time and energy and resources on something as trivial as a red hat? And the answer, of course, is that they recognized the power that such symbols had to challenge their authority. Because for all of their military might, their authority, like all authority, rested entirely on other people accepting it. And when more and more people had the courage to openly say, by wearing red caps, that they opposed the Nazis, that made very clear the shaky ground on which Nazi power rested. If we're going to work for social justice, we absolutely have to think outside the box, because the box we are in is generally not conducive to social justice and peace. The individualistic, capitalistic, militaristic box in which we live celebrates individuals who get ahead any way they can, regardless of how it affects others. And humor and creativity are necessary for us to imagine a different way of doing things. The tragic shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012 pushed Mennonite pastor Mike Martin into an aha moment in which he began to question why he even had a gun. And so he took it to a nearby blacksmith and had it dismantled and forged into a shovel and a rake. Thus was born Raw Tools. And there's a play on words there, because raw is war spelled backwards. So he's turning war around. So Raw Tools is a nonprofit that has destroyed and repurposed thousands of weapons, turning them into garden tools. And I first heard about this program from a man named Shane Claiborne, who has a fundamentalist Christian background. And as he held up a shovel, he said, "This is what a gun looks like when it's been born again." One way humor and creativity can disarm power is by making clear the absurdity of the system that is being opposed. Food Not Bombs is a nonprofit that since 1980 has been recovering food that otherwise would go to waste and serving free meals to the hungry. The founder, Keith McHenry, tells the story of the early days when the group sought to serve a meal near Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and the police came and arrested the volunteers. Pictures of him being led away in handcuffs and riot police guarding the food hit the local news, and the next week many more people came to volunteer, resulting in more arrests, and thus more volunteers the next week. By the mid-1990s, McHenry had been arrested 94 times and had accumulated 43 counts of, and I want you to listen to this carefully, conspiracy to serve food in violation of a court order. Conspiracy to serve food. All of this made for terrific publicity for the organization, and also made clear the absurd values of a society that builds weapons of mass destruction and arrests people for feeding the hungry. And today there are over 1,000 chapters of Food Not Bombs all over the world on every habitable continent. When we can use humor and creativity to say out loud the absurdity, cruelty, and stupidity of the current system, we can sometimes change the minds of people who might find protesters dangerous, frightening, and unpalatable. And we can also, perhaps, embarrass the powers that be into doing the right thing. And that's what happened in Liberia, my final story. In 2002, Liberia had been in a civil war for 13 years. Over 200,000 people had died. A third of the population was displaced. Women were tired of it, especially since they were particularly targeted with sexual violence, abduction, forced labor, and forced marriages. Lema Gaboe, a Christian mother of 5, and Asatu Ba Kenneth, a Muslim policewoman, joined together to form Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace. As the movement grew, over 2,500 women began to gather regularly near a prominent fish market where they were likely to see Charles Taylor, the dictator who had been ruling Liberia since 1997, demanding that he take steps to end the fighting. Initially, he ignored them, and then he threatened them with arrest, but the women stood their ground and refused to go away. Taking a page from the ancient Greek play Lysistrata, the women then launched a... I can see some people have read it. The women then launched a national sex strike, refusing not to have sex with their partners until the country was at peace. This brought them more publicity and more members. They then wrote a position paper on the Liberian crisis to present to the government, demanding that they engage in peace talks. In April of 2003, over 1,000 women marched to Monrovia, the capital, demanding an audience with Taylor, where he finally agreed to attend peace talks in Ghana with the other warlords. And now the women had to make sure that something would come of these peace talks. So they raised the money to send women to monitor the peace talks in Ghana. But once there, the peace talks stalled. Turns out the men saw the whole thing as a junket. They thought it was a time for a vacation in a fancy hotel, and they were unwilling to do the hard work of negotiating a peace treaty. Desperate, the women surrounded the meeting space and linked arms, refusing to allow anyone in or out of the room until they came up with a peace agreement. When the security guards came to arrest the woman for obstruction of justice, Gaboe played her last card. She stood up and threatened to strip naked. Now, in Liberian culture, for a woman to deliberately strip naked is considered the greatest curse. It is a long-standing, serious taboo. 2 weeks later, the details of a peace agreement were announced. Imagine that. Charles Taylor was sent into exile and later convicted of war crimes, and a UN peacekeeping force was sent to Monrovia to prepare for a transitional government and for an election. The women continued to closely monitor the implementation of the peace agreement and campaigned vigorously for the new election. And in January of 2006, Liberia elected Ellen Johnson Sirleaf to be the next president, the first woman to be a president of an African country. And in 2011, Gaboe and Sirleaf shared the Nobel Peace Prize for their nonviolent efforts to promote peace and their struggle for women's rights. So the women of Liberia achieved peace by persistence, refusing to have sex, and threatening to take off their clothes. Sometimes you just have to think outside the box. Thank you.